He walked onto the plane with quiet confidence. His tailored navy blue suit, polished shoes, and composed expression spoke volumes, not of arrogance, but of experience. The kind of experience that comes from years of boardrooms, billion-dollar deals, and leadership at the highest levels of the corporate world. He wasn't seeking attention. In fact, he preferred to remain unnoticed. But what happened on that flight would not only capture global attention, it would expose a truth many still deny exists. He had reserved a first-class seat, like he always did for international business travel. A window seat. Comfortable. Isolated. Ideal for reviewing documents before landing. The flight attendant greeted him politely, but without the enthusiasm she showed the previous passenger. Subtle, almost unnoticeable to an untrained eye, but not to him. He'd seen that look before. That momentary pause. The internal calculation. The forced smile. He brushed it off, attributing it to fatigue or stress. Everyone has bad days, after all. As the aircraft ascended into the clouds, the cabin settled into its familiar rhythm. Drinks were offered. He declined, requesting only still water. A few rows ahead, champagne glasses clinked and laughter erupted. The other first-class passengers, all seemingly regulars, were being catered to with visible warmth. He returned to his notes, unaware that a storm was brewing right above the polished ceiling panels. 2 hours into the flight, the meal service began. White linen trays, silver cutlery, and the scent of gourmet food filled the cabin. Flight attendants moved gracefully from seat to seat, placing entrees and wines with practiced elegance. To his left, a businessman unwrapped his filet mignon with a satisfied grin. To his right, a couple toasted with Chardonnay. But at his seat, nothing. He looked up briefly, expecting it to be a simple oversight. Perhaps they were starting from the front and would circle around. He continued reading. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Eventually, it became impossible to ignore. He pressed the service button. A few moments later, the same flight attendant approached. Her posture stiffened as she saw who had called. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice clipped, smile hollow. "Yes," he replied, calm but firm. "I haven't received my meal. I believe it may have been missed." The attendant hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. "Let me check," she said, then turned and disappeared down the aisle. He waited. 5 minutes. 10. No one returned. He looked around. Every passenger had been served. Every tray placed. Every drink refilled. Except his. It wasn't just an oversight anymore, it was a message. A silent, cruel message delivered in the most subtle yet unmistakable way. His stomach wasn't the problem. It was the principle. The realization that he was being treated differently, deliberately, despite having paid the same, or more, than everyone else. This wasn't about food. It was about dignity. He stood up and walked to the galley. "Excuse me," he said, meeting the eyes of a different attendant. "I'm still waiting on my meal." She looked startled. I was told you declined it." "No," he said slowly. "I never did." There was a long pause. "I'll see what I can do," she mumbled before disappearing behind a curtain. He returned to his seat, but this time, people were watching. Subtle glances. Whispered words. One man even chuckled under his breath. Behind that chuckle was something darker, a sense of superiority, amusement at someone else's humiliation. But what they didn't realize was that they weren't mocking an ordinary man. They were mocking someone with power. And influence. And a platform. 3 rows back, seated unobtrusively in economy, was his executive assistant. Young, sharp, and, most importantly, holding a phone that had captured every moment. Every delay. Every excuse. Every cold glance. Every empty tray. By the time the plane landed, the video was already edited. The captions were clear. The footage told a silent but thunderous story. And before the wheels even touched the ground, the assistant hit upload. The internet responded with fury. Within hours, the video had reached over 1 million views. The headline was brutal: Airline crew refuses meal to black CEO in first class. Comments flooded in. Some expressed shock. Others shared similar experiences. And some, predictably, tried to deny it all, claiming misunderstandings, errors, anything but the obvious. But the footage didn't lie. And neither did the facts that followed. By morning, the airline's public relations team was in full crisis mode. Statements were issued. Investigations were promised. But the CEO wasn't interested in empty words. He had been through enough of those in his career. This time, he wanted accountability. He reached out privately to the airline's board, contacts he knew from high-level conferences and mutual investments. He wasn't seeking vengeance. He wanted to know if the values they claimed to stand for actually meant anything when tested. Within 48 hours, a formal apology was delivered, both publicly and directly. But that wasn't all. The airline announced that the entire flight crew on that route had been suspended pending investigation. Later, it was confirmed, several of them were let go. Not just because of one incident, but because the video had sparked a wave of internal complaints. Other passengers. Other flights. A pattern had emerged, and the CEO's experience was just the final straw. The story went viral. News outlets picked it up worldwide. Discussions erupted about racial bias in luxury services, and whether status and money truly protect you from discrimination. The answer was now painfully clear: they do not. The CEO himself released a statement days later. Calm. Professional. But piercing. I don't want compensation. I don't want revenge. I want change. I want this industry to see that silence is complicity, and sometimes, silence comes on a tray that never arrives. That quote alone became a rallying cry. If stories like this make you reflect on the world we live in, now is the time to let your voice be heard. Drop a like, share this video, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done in his place? Subscribe to the channel if you believe in exposing truth, because this isn't the only story they tried to hide. The days that followed were anything but quiet. What had started as a single act of quiet humiliation aboard a luxury aircraft had now ignited a global conversation. News anchors debated it. Podcasts broke it down. Influencers reacted to the footage. The video of the black CEO being denied his meal in first class became a symbol, not just of racial bias, but of the illusion of equality in elite spaces. It wasn't about one tray of food. It was about everything that tray represented. Access. Dignity. Respect. And how quickly those things can be denied when prejudice goes unchecked. The airline, under pressure from shareholders and a storm of public outrage, took further action. A second video surfaced, this time from a former employee who had worked with the same crew. In it, she described a culture of favoritism, subtle racism, and frequent complaints that were routinely ignored by upper management. Her account only added fuel to the fire. Meanwhile, the CEO remained silent. Not out of weakness, but by strategy. He knew the value of timing. And when he finally spoke again, it wasn't on social media, it was in a live interview on one of the most watched primetime news shows in the country. He sat across from the host, calm and composed, as the clip of his experience played on screen behind them. "I'm not interested in destroying an airline," he began, his voice steady. "But I am deeply invested in accountability. In systems that claim to be inclusive but still allow behavior like this to continue unchecked. I didn't ask to become a symbol. But if that's what this moment requires, then so be it." His words resonated far beyond the broadcast. Companies began issuing internal memos to review their own service standards. Sensitivity training programs were relaunched. Some called it performative. Others called it progress. But no one could deny the impact one man's silent treatment had on a global scale. Behind the scenes, however, the ripple effect was just beginning. A whistleblower from the airline's HR department reached out anonymously to the press. Documents were leaked showing that complaints involving racial or discriminatory behavior were often marked as resolved without investigation, simply to protect the airline's public image. Names were named. Flights were listed. Records of passengers being flagged for non-cooperative behavior revealed a disproportionate number of cases involving minorities. That's when the CEO made his most unexpected move. Instead of launching lawsuits or calling for boycotts, he founded an independent coalition aimed at monitoring and exposing discrimination in luxury industries, aviation, hospitality, finance. Backed by other executives and civil rights attorneys, the coalition promised transparency where corporations had failed to provide it. Its first act? A formal request to government aviation authorities demanding mandatory reporting of discrimination complaints across all major airlines. A demand that sent shockwaves through an industry used to operating with little public scrutiny. Airlines scrambled to prepare for this new era. Some welcomed the move. Others resisted, fearing exposure. But the conversation was no longer optional. What began as one missing meal was now a movement. But the story doesn't end with policy changes or viral videos. Because for the CEO, the most powerful moment came weeks later, during a quiet meeting in a private conference room with the airline's CEO and board of directors. There were no cameras. No reporters. No applause. Just truth. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand resignations. What he did instead was look each of them in the eye and ask a simple question: if I looked different, would I have been served? Silence. They knew the answer. He knew it too. But asking the question in that space, in that way, forced them to face it. The airline has since implemented sweeping changes: independent monitors on random flights, diversity and bias training for all staff, and a confidential reporting line for passengers. They even invited the CEO to join their advisory board. He declined. He didn't want to be part of fixing their image, he wanted to hold them accountable from the outside. And that's exactly what he continues to do. In a world where justice often feels delayed or denied, this was one of the rare times where silence was broken, and consequences followed. Not everyone will experience this level of injustice in first class. But many will feel it in offices, restaurants, hotels, boardrooms. Places where you're told you belong, until someone silently suggests otherwise. That's why stories like this must be told. Repeated. Amplified. Because change doesn't begin when the world is watching. It begins the moment someone refuses to stay quiet. If this story moved you, let your voice echo further. Like this video, share it, and tell us in the comments, have you ever been treated differently for reasons no one will admit out loud? Your story matters, and the world needs to hear it. Subscribe for more real stories that reveal the truths they try to bury. Because sometimes, one voice is all it takes to shake an entire system.